Were the Bible patriarchs Abraham, Jacob, and Joseph also patriarchs of computational celestial mechanics, law, epigenetic engineering, cut-stone architecture, and advanced medical treatment? I raise this question now because it was in the year 5777, according to the Hebrew accounting. In our years, the year 2015, the Jerusalem newspaper HAARETZ had an article that said, no, Imhotep was not Joseph. Well, where did that come from? Joseph of the Bible, Imhotep of Egyptian history. They very much seem to be the same person. How did this come about? It was because presidential candidate Ben Carson suggested that the pyramids had been used for grain storage. Well, in fact, that was the case for the pyramid designed and constructed by Imhotep. Well, so let's set a background. First, the evolutionary scenario says that man has been becoming more and more intelligent over time. But in fact, the Bible picture is that man was created with a very super intelligence, and we can infer due to mutations that the intelligence of man today on average is considerably less than that of the first man and first woman, Adam and Eve. I've got the references here. One is by John Sanford, Genetic Entropy and the Mystery of the Genome, how genome is degrading over time, and also a book by Donald Chittick, Puzzle of Ancient Man, pointing out that ancient man had fantastic inventions, things that we would not imagine. And the point here in this picture is that if Adam's intelligence was extremely great, much greater than modern man, here in the year 1906 was Einstein's marvelous year in which he came up with 4 concepts in physics: the photoelectric effect, Brownian motion, special relativity, the mass energy equivalence. This is 4,000 years after Adam. So we can infer that somewhere in between there were some very capable people. And I want to look at the patriarchs, the Jewish patriarchs of the Bible, and where they may fall into this picture of history. I wrote a letter to HAARETZ, the Jerusalem newspaper. I sat down and wrote it on Election Day, 2016. Here it is. An open letter to HAARETZ and Jerusalem Friends on USA Election Day, November 8, 2016. Greetings from a child of Abraham by faith on the left coast, USA. When I leave in a few minutes to drop off my ballot, instead of being glued to the telly all day, I have chosen something more meaningful. To spend a few minutes sharing with HAARETZ and your readers some thoughts arising from your Julia Friedman article a year ago. No, Imhotep and Joseph were not one and the same. Since in the article Ms. Friedman was smacking about then candidate Dr. Ben Carson, whom I admire, I just thought to let you know I am still on the shelf quite seriously thinking about Joseph and Imhotep. And why? Given that Ms. Friedman's article was published in the year 5777, this is okay by me, it's within 10% of what I calculate from the Holy Bible, assuming you folks had your date right in celebrating the 3,000-year anniversary of Jerusalem as capital in 1997 AD. It seems the Joseph Imhotep times were nearer the time of first man Adam than to us today. Where or how did Imhotep historically proclaimed genius arise? Are we not evolving such that persons of antiquity should not approach modern man in brain capacity and function? Quite the opposite. From modern science we know that the genome and human fitness is degenerating rather than ascending. I know many university salaries depend on teaching the opposite, but just deal with it. So let's acknowledge that by fairly inferred extension, progenitor Adam would be decidedly superior in intellect to Einstein and to the 22% of 20th century Nobel laureates of Jewish or substantially Jewish descent. Given that, look at who falls between: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and more. To think about Joseph, let's first see what extra stuff we can infer about the patriarchs. First, how about exalted father, Abram, later father of a multitude, Abraham? Genesis 15, verse 6 explains that Abram's faith, quote, was counted to him as righteousness, unquote. A verse which, coming well before the law of Moses, is foundational to Christian theology. But it comes immediately following Genesis 15, verse 5, in which God speaks to Abram, quote, and he took him outside and said, now look toward the heavens and count the stars, if you are able to count them. And he said to him, so shall your descendants be, unquote. Apparently, Abram did much more than just stare at stars. The historian Josephus, Book 1, Chapter 8, recounted that Abram, quote, communicated to them, meaning the Egyptians, arithmetic, and delivered to them the science of astronomy. For before Abram came into Egypt, they were unacquainted with those parts of learning. For that science came from the Chaldeans into Egypt." Unquote. I don't know what source materials Josephus used, but maybe he was reading historian Berosus, who, working in Babylonia in the early 3rd century BC, translated with attested accuracy multiple cuneiform documents into Greek. Here's a quote from Berosus. Quote, "Moreover, there lived in the 13th in descent," meaning from Noah, "a man named Abraham, a man of noble race and superior to all others in wisdom. Of him they relate that he was the inventor of astrology and the Chaldean magic, and that on account of his piety he was esteemed of God. It is further said that under the directions of God he removed and lived in Phoenicia, and there taught the Phoenicians the motions of the sun and moon and all other things, for which reason he was held in great reverence by their king." In Babyloniaca, as cited in Cooper, 2011, Authenticity of the Book of Genesis. Ignoring the obviously revisionist astrology and magic notions, it seems Abram was indeed an accomplished astronomer. You can confirm it for yourself. The land of Abimelech, king of Gerar, look in Genesis chapter 20, was included in the area called Phoenicia at that time. So, is that all we might know about Abram and astronomy? Not at all. It was only early in this year of 2016 that the world heard that ancient cuneiform tablets dated to several centuries BC revealed astronomical calculations using a kind of proto-calculus. You can see the article in Science Magazine online. Math whizzes of ancient Babylon figured out forerunner of calculus. January 28, 2016. Astroarchaeologist Matthew Ossendreyer, delving into older texts, realized that his 3rd century BC tablets depended on purely mathematical Babylonian texts written between 1800 BC and 1600 BC, which also described computations with a trapezoid. That lands us precisely approaching the time of Abram. I here offer my conviction that it was Abram who came up with the Babylonian proto-calculus to compute orbital movement of Jupiter, then making the king of Babylonia especially favor Abram. In fact, have you ever wondered what father would name his newborn son Exalted Father? Much more likely a title granted by the king to a highly meritorious yet childless servant whom he wished to honor. If you have another or better name to attach to the astronomical proto-calculus, come forth with it and let's open the discussion. So, is that all we might know about Abram? No, there's much more. This time about blessings to mankind through social order, that is, law. Despite protestations to the contrary, the famed King Hammurabi of the first Babylonian dynasty seems quite clearly to be one and the same Amraphel, king of Shinar, found in Genesis chapter 14 in the Bible. Confusion to this day abounds due to comparing translation of the Babylonian name to translation of the name from Hebrew. But comparing the Babylonian name directly to the Hebrew clears up the question. Cooper in 2011 writes, quote, "As Professor Sayce confesses, he himself initially found the points of identity between Amraphel and Hammurabi difficult to recognize, but directly match the Hebrew with the cuneiform and we have a different outcome altogether. The two names are, in every sense, identical, or letter for letter." So knowing that God promised Abram in Genesis 12 verse 3, quote, "In you all the families of the earth will be blessed," we should know immediately that includes social order for peaceful living. So let us reasonably surmise that the God whom Abram served also gave him divine counsel for earthly social order, and Hammurabi was pleased and blessed to take the advice from his skilled astronomer. That is, the hackneyed story that the biblical 10 Commandments were derived from Hammurabi's code is just that, a hackneyed story. God is always consistent, so we must expect that the principle of law-based social order conveyed to Hammurabi through Abram will reasonably conform to those principles in the 10 Commandments a few generations later. And speaking of Hammurabi, he likely renewed acquaintance with Abram following the Battle of the Kings in Genesis 14. From Genesis 14, the whole punitive expedition was being led by the king of Elam. Elam held overlordship over Babylon, Shinar, at that time. So Hammurabi may have been a less than enthusiastic participant in the punitive raids, with troops of the 4 kings decimated by battles and exhausted carrying booty. We can imagine a conversation Abram may have had with Hammurabi, like, "My lord the king, may you be pleased to take the stuff you had accumulated before you came to the cities of the plain, and I will take back the stuff to the 5 kings of the plain." Happily, Hammurabi may have been pleased to strike such a deal with Abram, and soon after returning to Shinar, he had the strength to cast off the overlordship of Elam and extend the rule of the first Babylonian dynasty. It is a matter of record. Quote, "For many years before and for 6 years after the accession of Hammurabi, the kings of Elam were overlords of all the cities of Babylonia, including Babylon itself." You can find this in Bible and Spade, Krager, Oxford, 1936. So, we can place the Battle of the Kings in Genesis 14 in the first few years of the reign of Hammurabi. Indeed, non-biblical history roundly corroborates the greatness of Abram, promised by God and affirmed by events which followed. But is that all? There's Jacob. For that, let's start thinking from the work of German archaeologist Manfred Bietek, excavating in Goshen the apparent compound of Joseph and his family. You can find this in an article by Berkowitz in Breaking Israel News, January 20th, 2016. Quote, "New film takes on archaeological deniers of biblical Exodus, proves story is accurate and true." This article includes the claim that Avaris ruins are from a foreign shepherding culture with architecture typical of northern Syria, the home of Abraham. Well, that architectural style is all well and good, except I don't get the connection to Abraham, but I do connect it to Jacob. Joseph, as the vizier of Egypt and beloved by his father Jacob, would have deferred to his father's preference in home design. Where would the tent-dwelling Jacob get exposure to home compounds, except in the 20 years he was genetically engineering his uncle Laban's goats? Oh, genetically engineering goats, did I say? Yes, but Scripture said it first. Functionally, though the Bible record of Jacob's herds of spotted and not spotted goats provided lots of mirth and scorn in the enlightened 20th century, but complete genome sequencing has opened the entirely new area of epigenetics. We must make no mistake that God's command at creation for mankind and all life to fill the earth demands rapid, explosive, adaptive speciation. That is, microevolution among kinds, decidedly not macroevolution. Now only in this 21st century AD is science on the threshold of understanding processes producing the fossil phenomena. That is, abrupt appearance and stasis, called the Cambrian explosion, and its Asian cousin, the Yunnan explosion of China. Still not convinced? Well, yesterday I glanced at the article, The Role of Methylation of DNA in Environmental Adaptation by Flores Wolskin and Amdam. Maybe Jacob could not spell methylation, but he did not have to in order to stroll away with a nice herd of goats besides his wives and kids. And the scientists who 20 years ago resisted the foolish and costly sequencing of the entire genome had no more idea than Father Jacob that Flores et al. Would be presenting at a 2013 AD symposium entitled Ecological Epigenetics at the Society for Integrative and Comparative Biology in San Francisco, California. So, there you have it, my Jerusalem friends. Your patriarchs and my spiritual patriarchs look like the nobelists of antiquity. Mathematics, astronomy, law, genetic engineering. What is left? Well, maybe architecture and medicine. Well, that brings us full circle to Joseph and the possible identification with Imhotep. There's so much to say about Imhotep, the practical genius of the ancient Egyptian medical text found in the Edwin Smith Papyrus, attributed to Imhotep, or the comprehensive functional scope and architectural innovation by Imhotep for the stepped pyramid of Djoser. Much is written and much yet to be written, but I recall that on his deathbed, Father Jacob gave a most effusive blessing to Joseph in Genesis 49, verses 22 to 26. And we surely must expect both, number one, that it has been and is yet being fulfilled, and, number two, that its fulfillment will be seen by mankind, so we may yet again affirm that the God of the Bible is a promise-giving and a promise-keeping God. So, looking for something like epigenetic functionality because you think it's likely there and it's something to be found, so should all continue to seek identification of Joseph. If Imhotep, all well and good. If not, God's promises will still surely be fulfilled. And about the time for Imhotep, Egyptian chronologies seem filled with question marks, like the reigns of simultaneous regents being assigned sequential eras, stuff like that. If you happily buy vegetables from a vendor who counts the same carrot twice, maybe you will happily buy the experts cited by your Julia Friedman in her article a year ago. Otherwise, be quick to chew for discernment, slow to swallow. I'm out of time now and surely beyond HAARETZ line limitation, and I need to go drop off my ballot before polls close in 3 hours. I pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Please pray for America. It seems self-evident that the human rule thing without God is not going so well. Reply came from HAARETZ, November 13th, 2016. Many thanks for submitting your article to haaretz.com. Unfortunately, this is not the kind of article that we publish. Yours, Simon, Managing Editor, haaretz.com.